Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Joint Subcommittee to Study Growing Transit Needs in Northern Virginia. I'm Adam Eben from the State Senate, and I chair the committee. I guess the first thing we'll do, we're still expecting one or two members to come in, but let's take all of those that are here for now.
Senator Eben?
Here.
Delegate Sickles? Senator Boysko?
Here.
Senator Servo? Delegate Delaney? Delegate Austin? Delegate McClure?
Here.
Walter Alcorn? Here. Paul Smedberg? Kate Matisse?
Here.
Director Robinson?
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I want to welcome DRPT Chair Tiffany Robinson. Thank her for representing Secretary Miller and the Commonwealth here. Okay, the agenda has been published. I did want to mention, I am going to, if you indulge me, we're going to swap out items 5 and 4. We'll cover both items, but we'll get the WMATA update before the DMV Moves Task Force update. First order of business, and we're joined by Delegate Mark Sickles. First order of business is a report from the chair of the technical working group, Mr. DeVetter. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Eben. I'm going to give a very, very brief update here in the interest of moving on to the presentations. For item 2, for our recap of the last SJ28 meeting in June, the subcommittee reviewed revenue estimates and qualitative evaluation criteria for 14 potential revenue sources across statewide PRTC and NVTC geographies. In that discussion, we heard clearly from the subcommittee for a desire to better understand the scale of agency needs so that they can further evaluate those potential sources. Essentially, understanding that scale is important to make decisions about large sources, how to understand potentially how smaller or medium sources may or may not fit into any potential solution, both at a regional and state level. Since we last met in June, staff of the technical working group have been hard at work refining those revenue estimates, working with our consultant team to document the methodology, reviewing consultant work on cost containment and accountability tools, and working closely with our transit agency partners as they refine their needs. Needs forms the bulk of our content before you this morning and represents a significant staff effort in interpreting information for a variety of transit agencies. This can often be an apples to oranges kind of exercise, and the technical working group has done its best to align information in a digestible and concise format. With that, I have no need for a long report, and we can dive right into the next agency up.
Okay, thank you, and thanks to all the members of the technical working group. How many people are on that group? There's quite a few, right?
I don't have the precise number,
Got, like,
but yeah.
More than 15 people, right? Or about?
I think it's about 8, and NVTC coordinates with our local transit agency partners as well.
Well, thanks to all who participated in that, and thanks to you for coordinating that and sharing it. The next item we're going to take up is the WMATA update, and we're going to hear from General Manager and CEO Randy Clark, and I guess from Tom Webster, Acting EVP and CFO of WMATA. So, gentlemen.
I thought I had it. Thank you, Senator Eben. So one, welcome to Metro's Eisenhower facility. I know some of you had the opportunity to get a tour of what we call the Metro Integrated Command and Communications Center. And after this is over, if we were not able to get a tour, we have some staff members that'd be happy to kind of show you around. This is kind of ground zero for us on how we do operations. It's 24/7, 365 facility. And it's where we do all of our emergency operations center and special event management out of here as well. So very happy to be in the city of Alexandria as a Metro facility. As you mentioned, with me is Tom Webster. He is our chief acting CFO and otherwise our EVP of planning and performance. So many people know Tom. He's been around a lot of these topics. I just want to start off and just thank you, Senator, and all the members of this committee It matters a lot to hear us at Metro for the work that you're doing. We also have simultaneously our DMV Moves effort, which some of you are involved in that as well, and been really, just quite frankly, great supporters for a long time of Metro and transit, both in the region and across the whole Commonwealth. So we don't want to take any moment and not recognize all the work you've done. Our success that we've got going right now, and I'll mention in a second, would not be possible without your partnership and commitment that you've all done. And I'll also mention Board Member Smedberg is co-chairing DMV Moves, and I want to really recognize his particular leadership on this topic. Paul's been with the board the longest, most tenured of all of our board members, and he knows the stuff inside and out, and he's really stepped up an enormous amount of extra time and leadership. And we're really excited that Board Member Alcorn is involved. He's now our Chair of Operations and Safety, and making sure those topics are at the forefront of what we do every time. So, and then Board Member Letourneau finally just left the organization, and he contributed mightily to this organization as well. So just from the staff level, we want to recognize the work they do all the time. Lastly, I want to recognize my partner in crime here to my left, Kate. We talk about these topics a lot, and the amount of coordination that is happening at the staff and technical and leadership levels between MBTC and the Metro is very strong, and we really appreciate the just good, transparent partnership that we do. If we go to the next slide, basically our budget, and Tom's going to get in more detail here. We're about a $5 billion organization, more or less split between capital and operating. Operating, we have a 3% subsidy growth, as you all know, and we've successfully managed to that for this year, and we expect going forward to manage that. It wasn't that long ago that we thought that was not going to be possible, but we now believe that we're able to manage inside of that 3% cap. Whether that is the right cap or not probably is a debatable thing, what the number should be, but we can manage within that. And Tom will explain some of the elements around that. And obviously, we are driving the regional economy, and as many of you know, wherever the buildings are being built in this region are near Metro. Wherever the jobs are growing, and we obviously, from a regional point of view, need our economy to thrive, it's where Metro is going, let alone the environmental, the equity, and the other benefits the transit obviously innately brings. So Tom will hit a little bit of these themes, but that's generally, some of the basic facts that Metro is so critical to our region and the Commonwealth. The next slide is where I want to spend just a few moments to highlight some of the things that I'm just really proud of this organization, from the board all the way to almost 13,000 members of our team. I think Board Member Smedberg says it the best. We've really transformed this organization. We are highly focused on the customer, and by doing that, we are driving really good results. So we are safer, more frequent, more reliable, more cost efficient than we were years ago, and sometimes more than any time in Metro's history. We just won what's called the APTA, so it's our National Associations for Transit Award as Top Transit Agency in North America. It's the first time Metro has won that in almost 30 years, and it's a really great recognition for the work that everyone, and not just at Metro, all of our partners, none of us could do this without everybody together. A couple other things I want to highlight here. We've led the country for over 2 years in ridership growth. So we have the highest return post-COVID of any agency in the country. We now carry more people on bus than we did before the pandemic. A little bit of change going on in the last couple of months with our network redesign. And we also had 54 straight months of ridership growth. So even with the federal shutdown, and that is definitely impacting some ridership, there's no question about that. I was on a train this morning that was crush load. And so we are still seeing growth across all non-federal trips in our system. So midday, evening, all non-federal trips are continuing to grow, which is a really healthy sign for our region economy. We also are currently at an 8-year low of crime on Metro and on pace for the lowest crime year we've ever had on the system. And I want to just really thank our regional partners for the collaboration on that. But I think if you saw our control center upstairs, you'll get a sense of how we are managing that. We have a higher level of reliability than we've had in years. Most of that is directed at the investment made in 2018 around elevators and escalators, rail cars. We don't have Metro on fire as a daily meme in this region anymore for a reason, because we are not. And that service quality is very high. Highest customer satisfaction we've ever had on rail and bus in the last year. So generally that means we're not perfect. We're never going to be perfect, but generally that means people are thinking the service they're getting is what they expect. And then lastly, one thing that I want to highlight is in the last couple of years, between the board and the staff, we've been able to identify over $500 million of cost savings and cost containment. And that is a big deal, between our collective bargaining agreements, working collaboratively with our union partners, to how we deliver the capital program, standards that we use, more use of technology. Just the automatic train operation on our rail system alone is safer, more reliable, and probably will save us over $10 million this year alone. So that's a good example of the work that is happening at Metro. We are hoping the $265 million continues to grow this year, and hopefully this federal shutdown will end soon for all of us for a variety of reasons. But I'm really just proud of where we are from a service delivery right now as the organization. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom. He's going to go through a variety of slides relatively quickly, and of course, we welcome any kind of feedback, comments, questions that you would have, and just again reiterate my thank you for all the work that you're doing on this very important topic.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom, for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Senator, and members of the subcommittee. I'll be fairly quick running through what are some dense slides here. So just starting with great ridership at Virginia-based Metro rail stations. We're seeing about 100,000 customers enter at Virginia rail stations, which importantly is 16% higher this September compared to the prior September. And you see the positive trend over the past several years, with a peak back in April of over 108,000 customers entering at Virginia rail stations. Next slide. So we completed our last fiscal year, FY25, wrapping up the audit of that now, but we know the results. We saved over $120 million in our operating budget in the fiscal year that ended at the end of June. Some of that was one-time operating savings, but the most important part of this is it allowed us to preserve funding for capital investment. We were able to save resources on the operating side, which allowed us to reduce the amount of maintenance costs we fund with funds ordinarily intended for capital, so federal grant funds, allowing us to reinvest that $92 million back into our capital program. Next slide. How we were able to achieve that, we did a number of things going into the budget year, including freezing salaries and wages for many of our employees. We created a cost efficiency task force really focused on identifying savings, both one-time and recurring savings, and really identifying ways to drive efficiency and drive down unit costs of providing service. We also did a number of things, and this is a continuation of efforts over the past few years to optimize our service, align service as best we can with the levels of ridership over the course of the day, week, and year, and really optimizing the use of the number of 6- and 8-car trains, and that allows us again to save resources by optimizing that while still meeting our ridership and potential crowding needs. On this next slide, several things. We, as you know, implemented our return to automatic train operations, and that allowed us to reduce our operating budget and then reinvest that into service improvements where we're seeing ridership growth and ridership demand. On the bus network, we implemented our Better Bus Network redesign this past June, improving service frequency, improving connections for customers, and doing so with the same level of resources that were projected. That reinvestment of resources by making the service more efficient allows, again, for a lower unit cost of service and for us to maintain a good quality, reliable service within the resources we have available. We had a large fare increase going into the last year, so in FY, the year that we're in now, we do not have a fare increase built into that budget. The next one is projected for FY28. And again, the idea is to keep up with inflation with fare increases periodically. And then we have a number of efforts underway to modernize in spaces where really the environment has changed. So I'll give one example. Cash is a much less used thing in society now, and we've implemented a number of things in fare payment, including mobile and now Tap, Ride, and Go, that are really driving down the use of cash. So now we're evaluating and implementing changes to our cash collection and cash management processes, which will again allow us to be more efficient and save resources to be reinvested elsewhere. On the next slide, so looking ahead to our next fiscal year, we're perpetually in our budget cycle here. So look, covered FY25, that last was FY26. Now I'm looking ahead to FY27 that starts in next July. Yep, a little closer. Okay, thanks. So just a number of things to highlight here. We are now able to take full advantage of the cost savings associated with our return to automatic train operations, as we're again optimizing the schedules for ATO. Looking again for more efficiencies in the schedule of our bus network. We're taking a very close look again this year, as we have in the past few, at our overall position counts and vacancy management. And as Randy said, we continue to see ridership and revenue growth that allows, again, for us to look for reinvestment in the system. So we're looking again at optimizing service for the level of ridership that we anticipate in next fiscal year. Looking at some organizational development investments, and this is a minor thing in the scheme of a $5 billion budget, but an area of focus for us going into the next year. And then continuing to look to drive down that reliance on capital funds for maintenance costs. So we had a projection going into this fiscal year, taking another look at that as part of the budget process, trying to drive down the use of capital funds for maintenance. On the next slide. So in the coming weeks, we'll be updating and refreshing our ridership and revenue projections, but just a hint here that we're anticipating driving those up relative to the baseline forecast that was assumed this past spring. So doing that work now with updates in November and December of this year. Next slide. Another important effort, and again, we're real proud of our infrastructure and finance and planning teams for taking a very tough look at our capital investments. Looking for administrative savings and essentially driving down the overhead of delivering the capital program. Looking again at simplifying bespoke or customized practices and processes and requirements to try to reduce costs and gain efficiencies. And the whole idea here is the further we can make the capital dollars go, the more we can reinvest in the system and the more we can preserve funding for future needs. One example we've talked about a lot in a number of settings is our bus shelter program. We had a very customized bus shelter that was quite expensive. We were able to reduce that by standardizing and using something more off the shelf, cutting costs for each shelter and the overall program by half. On the next slide. So some real specific examples of performance improvements we've seen as a result of dedicated funding and the region's investment in Metro. So as we look at different assets in our system, so buses, rail cars, and escalators in these examples, and we make targeted investments either in replacement or rehabilitation of those assets, we see measurable, repeatable performance improvement in reliability and in uptime and performance. On the next slide, so just some examples of recent investments made with, again, dedicated funding and our PREA funding and other fund sources. Some major investments in bus divisions, platform rehabilitation, new rail cars, and I could go on and on and on here, but we continue to make the region's dollars go far in our capital program and preserving our system. The next slide, again, repeating what you all know, we have frankly a crisis approaching here. Our capacity to issue debt against dedicated funding is expected to run out in about FY29. Because dedicated funding and other fund sources weren't indexed, inflation has significantly eroded the value of that, really accelerating the time that we run out of that capital funding capacity. So Nick will be speaking in a few moments about DMV moves, but really what will sustain Metro's capital program is a dedicated, reliable investment funding source that grows at basically at inflation each year, is bondable, and is unencumbered so that it can be used for different types of investments across the system. And then the next slide, just highlighting here, Nick will go into more detail on this in the next item. We believe that $460 million additionally annually that grows by 3% or something like that, plus our partners' investments in bus priority corridors will allow us to reinvest in Metro, modernize, and again, sustain performance into the future. On the next slide, we've done some estimating and some projecting of what happens if that $460 million that grows with inflation is invested in the capital program, and what happens if it isn't. So the orange line shows essentially the backlog of unmet capital needs that are due, growing over time due to lack of investment. With that $460 million growing with inflation, we expect to be able to sustain, again, the performance, the reliability, and the safety, and again, overall performance of the system well into the future. That concludes our presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation, gentlemen. Are there any questions about this presentation before we move on? Yes, Mr. Alcorn.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Excellent presentation from you and Randy. Really appreciate all the work on pushing efficiencies and managing costs. I think that it's huge, really important. Just a reminder for the subcommittee, and I think we're going to hear more about this from Andrew later, but the capital needs are clear, absolutely clear, at least to me, going forward. In Virginia, we also had, with rebaselining, some extraordinary measures that were taken both at the state level and at the local level. So if anybody leaves this presentation thinking that's all we need to do in Virginia, we actually have a little more to do. But we'll be hearing more on that later. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Delegate Sickles.
So could you remind everybody what's in the 460? Because I am focused on 300 million from the next session, a little bit more than 300 million, for half for capital, half for operating. What's the other balance? What's that for? Or that's existing funds that come through the system?
I think, maybe you're right. The 460 number refers to what Metro needs to get to a revolving bond program across all three of our jurisdictional partners.
All three?
Yeah, so
Okay.
Virginia's number, I think, on the capital is about 150. About 150.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll take the 460 from Virginia if that's the offer on the table this morning. All those in favor? No, okay, but.
Okay. Well, thank you for your presentation. Thanks for hosting us today. Next, we have a report from the DMV Moves Task Force, represented by Paul Smedberg, who's the task force co-chair, and Nick Donahue, who's the task force facilitator. Paul, did you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Senator Eben. I just want to take a moment. I see a lot of new faces in the audience today, so just very briefly, just for a minute, want to tell people that DMV Move started, gosh, what, Randy? How many, a year and a half ago?
Yeah, about
a year and a half ago. And it is a joint effort between WMATA and the Council of Governments Board. And it has been, successful, up to this point. We still have, a lot of work to do. I want to recognize Clark Mercer and his team. Clark is the executive director of COG, and Randy, obviously, and Tom and their senior team at Metro. Also want to acknowledge the work of Nick Donahue, who we will hear from later in coordinating everyone's thoughts here in a comprehensive, cohesive way. Also want to recognize and let folks know we do have two working groups, our government partners group, which is the administrative heads of the various jurisdictions and other partners, and then the community partners group. Our goal from the very beginning is that we need a reliable and predictable source of funding that is bondable for Metro. I think that's key, that people understand that it's bondable. The work that was done in 2018 and 2019 to get us the dedicated funding was, extraordinary and was extremely helpful. That was not indexed, so the value of those dollars have lessened over time, and we need to fix that, and Nick will go into detail about why that's important, and that we need to have growth at least, 3%, which is where we're at now. So that's, the foundation by which we're trying to build upon and educate people on. And again, the team has done a really excellent job. And again, I want to highlight the senior teams, but also particularly the government partner teams, because they're the ones who are on the ground who are going to be implementing this, and also appreciate the engagement of Delegate Sickles, the state team, Director Robinson, and Senator Eben on all the work over the last year or so with Metro. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nick Donahue, who is the advisor here on this project.
Well, thank you so much, Chair Eben and members of the committee. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you here this morning. Can you all hear me in the back? There we go. I heard now you can. So my name is Nick Donahue. I am the facilitator of the DMV Moves process. That is a joint effort that was formed and started May 1st of 2024 with COG and WMATA, really looking at what do we need for world-class transit in the DMV region. So it's also, obviously DC, Maryland, and Virginia. I'm going to be focusing today a lot on the WMATA needs aspect of the work that we've been doing at DMV Moves. And I just want to really reiterate before I get into some of the recommendations that we'll be bringing to the DMV Moves Task Force next week, why we're having this discussion. Tom obviously hit on that, but the simple fact is, absent action by the funding partners for WMATA, its capital program is going to shrink by $800 million a year. And that means they cannot sustain the condition of that system. Many of us remember what the system was like in the mid-2010s. We didn't like where things were at that time. We came together as a region because we found those conditions to be unacceptable. I think the region, that was the first time we'd ever provided dedicated funding for WMATA, but again, as was mentioned, we did that with fixed funding. And when you're supporting a bond program and you have fixed funds that don't grow over time, there's an inevitable thing that happens, and that thing is now happening. And so sometime in the next 2 years, WMATA will run out of the ability to issue debt backed by those funds, and that will cause their capital program to shrink by $800 million. So just level set. I know this is my third presentation here before this kind of subcommittee, but just to always say that part at the outset, that's why we're having all of these discussions. That's why we're really going there. So moving to the next slide, what we will be recommending and bringing to the DMV Moves Task Force for their consideration next week is a regional, and by that I mean DC, Maryland, and Virginia funding request of $460 million a year starting in FY28 that would need to grow at 3% a year. That funding will go directly to two key aspects. First, ensuring the Metro, both Metro Bus and Metro Rail system, are maintained in a state of good repair. The Metro has done a really good job of bringing down the state of good repair backlog, but for the reasons I just talked about, absent an influx of new funding, they cannot simply sustain that condition with the resources that they will have available. In addition to that, that funding will go to a rail modernization program that will make significant improvements in how the Metro Rail system functions, and importantly, replace Metro's signaling system. For those of you who aren't familiar with the signaling system, it was designed in the 1970s. Just to kind of put that in perspective, the typical form of like the phone then was a rotary phone. So this is not the newest system in the world. If you're thinking, hey, Nick, what about the Silver Line? The Silver Line has a new rotary phone signaling system, if you will, that was installed there. I had the pleasure, I'll call it that, of touring a signaling room actually on the Red Line several weeks ago, and I would just say, like, guys, we are working with a very outdated signaling system that needs to be replaced. But when we make that investment, there's also an opportunity to look at other modernization investments to allow us to leverage that significant investment in the signaling system to help with operating costs, but also the customer experience. And so let's go to the next slide if we could. Tom already talked about this, so I'm not going to belabor this particular slide, but again, the orange line is what Metro anticipates the condition of the system will be, looking at kind of the overall state of good repair backlog, absent additional funding moving forward. To put things in perspective, in the 2036 timeframe, that's back to where the state of good repair backlog was in 2016 and 17. So without new funding, it does not take very long to return to where things were pre-2018. And again, I think we all agreed at that time that was not a place that we wanted to be. So going to the next slide, though, I want to talk now a little bit more about rail modernization. So this is several different types of investments here that has a significant impact on how the Metro Rail system functions. So really, really importantly, it's replacing the signaling system that needs to be replaced. That is outdated technology from the 1970s. Metro actually at times struggles to find manufacturers to make some of the parts, and so they have to fabricate some of these things themselves. I personally want Metro focused on running great transit service and not fabricating signaling parts because the manufacturers don't exist. What it also does, though, with this new signaling system is it's going to dramatically improve the reliability of Metro Rail service. And so in other systems where they've implemented this new signaling, which is called communication-based train control, they have 99% reliability or higher. Importantly, though, as a customer, beyond the reliability benefits, it's going to make your trip faster. And so if you are someone who is on the Metro Rail system today, this can shave minutes off of your trips. Some of you may know I spent a long time working in Virginia as the Deputy Secretary of Transportation. We would have killed to have studies of highway projects that said we were going to save individuals from a given project 5-6 minutes on a from a project. That is just really, really significant kind of travel time savings there. But the other thing that this does is it helps bend down the operating cost curve. And this is where I think the general manager and his team really deserve a ton of credit. These were things people in Virginia were asking for during the 2017 and 2018 timeframe. Like, what are capital investments, or how can we bend down the operating cost curve? Rail modernization helps bend down the operating cost curve because you can run the existing levels of service we have today with less trains. Or said differently, you can increase service frequencies for the same operating budget in the future once we've made these types of investments. This is one of the first times in my memory that WMATA has come out with significant capital projects that really get at how do we bend that operating cost curve down, which is really, really important kind of long-term to make sure that we in this region have the transit system that we want and that we can afford. So I just really want to give, again, these folks credit for that type of work. Moving to the next slide. Some really important things, though, as you guys think about this work in Virginia, is this funding, unlike the 2018 funding, needs to grow. We're saying 3% a year, that's kind of just generally some historical things that have happened in the last few years, the rate of inflation growth there. But what's really important, and I'd ask you guys in this committee to think about, is we need these funds to be bondable. So in Virginia, that's a little bit more complicated than it is in DC and in Maryland. And so Delegate Sickles or Senator Eben will correct me if things have changed, or Senator Boysko, but in 2018, that meant state funds couldn't be used for that, because if we're using state funds, WMATA essentially has to keep going to the General Assembly to get debt authorizations to issue that debt. It impacts the state debt capacity, and the universities and everyone else get very excited when we started to have those discussions. And so the conclusion at that time was for WMATA to actually be able to bond those dollars and do it in a way that met their cash flow needs, we needed to use regional funds to accomplish that, so that it was outside of essentially debt authorizations controlled by the Assembly and impacting the state's debt capacity. So as you kind of think about this issue, that's a really important consideration to keep at the front of your minds there. We're also in DMV moves, though, talking about what are accountability and transparency provisions that we can put in place with this new funding. As the general manager said, a real goal of this initiative is to ensure that this is a sustainable solution for the long term. And so, you know, we were here in 2018, we're now here in 2025. In my mind, there's not a third bite at this apple. And so we've worked we've pushed WMATA pretty hard to demonstrate that over the long term, this will create a revolving bond program, that with this new funding, we do not run into, quote, a bond cliff like we have in the next 2 years anytime in the near future here. And so we've actually looked out 20, 30 years to say, okay, demonstrate to us how this can support your capital program at the levels that you need. And I'm happy to say they have given us plenty of documentation to show that that is possible. So that's really, really important. One of the other things that we're proposing and recommending to the task force is to update the 3% cost control measure that was put in place in 2018. And just as a quick reminder, the way that functions today is it's a 3% cap on the overall kind of operational subsidy that comes from Virginia. We'd like to restructure that and have it be in place in all 3 jurisdictions, Virginia, DC, and Maryland, where instead of being on the overall level of subsidy, it's on what WMATA actually produces. So every year, the board and you as local elected officials decide how much transit you want to have in this region. And what we're asking WMATA to do is to commit that that transit will never cost more than 3% more than it did the year before. So again, the amount of service you want to buy is up to you. But what WMATA is going to commit to you is you know how much it will cost next year and the year after that. And the way the 3% cap works today, you actually don't have that commitment. And so this is a new commitment that WMATA is willing to make with these additional funding, because it's going to allow them to put in place some of these capital investments that we talked about that help bend the operating cost curve down. Next slide. Really important in this as well, though, is when I go back and talk to folks about 2018, everyone's understanding of the outcomes and the assumptions are really, really different. Even people who were in the room with me in 2017 as we put together that bill, I'll say, oh, it's going to do this. There's like, what? That's not what I remembered, Nick. We are documenting all of the assumptions and anticipated outcomes that are underlying this and are asking WMATA to report back to the region on an annual basis about whether or not those assumptions are turning out to be true, slightly off, or really off. So again, if unfortunately we are having this discussion again in 10 years because there's a problem, we can look at those reports, the assumptions that we've written down today, and if the assumptions were really off and we did our best but we were just wrong, then as a region we need to kind of understand that WMATA did the best it could. Things happened that were differently than what we thought, and we have to figure out how we want to address that situation. The flip side of that is if the assumptions generally have turned out the way we anticipated and WMATA shows up in 10 years and says there's a big problem, there need to be some very, very tough conversations between this region, the WMATA board, and WMATA management at that time to say, why did this happen? This should not have happened. And again, that's not something we've had the ability to do in the past. And so that's why we're documenting all these things and requiring a new kind of report from WMATA that will replace some existing reports. Moving forward. So what do we get if we are able to move together as a region to achieve this? First, we are going to have a system that is going to stay in a state of good repair. Over time, we're going to get more reliable, faster, and safer trips on Metro Rail from the rail modernization program. The core capacity issues at the Roslyn Tunnel that we've talked about a long time in Virginia through the rail modernization and some of the bus priority projects that I'm talking about next will be addressed. And so for years, we've talked about the need for a second Roslyn Tunnel or additional things through the District of Columbia. With this program of investments, that issue is addressed, kind of moving forward and at a much lower cost than what we talked about with some of the kind of past concepts here.
Can you clarify on the tunnel, you mean to improve the tunnel or not to establish a second tunnel?
I'll let the general manager.
Yeah, Senator, I think that's a great question. And we're going to be doing a lot more work with the board in the upcoming 2 meetings that we have. But we've already kind of previewed this, which is the challenge, and just for terminology, I know we're in Virginia, so a lot of people say Roslyn Tunnel. It's not the tunnel that's the issue. It's from Roslyn to Stadium Armory. That whole section is the issue where we call interlining, where the 3 lines run together. So we have 2 different issues. One is capacity. How many trains can we put through that section? And 2 is reliability or resiliency. So every day we're gonna have something. It could be a maintenance topic, but like we could have someone with a medical emergency. So if we have a medical emergency at McPherson Square, trains all the way back to Tyson's are gonna be impacted, or to Springfield, because we got a single track around that. So what we were trying to say is, what is the best way to address that? One option was a new tunnel, and then through the city, do something else with Virginia, and we had an idea called the Bloop that got a lot of attention, but that's a better part of, depending how you do it, up to $30 billion for a new rail line. So I think most of us know that's not going to happen, certainly no near in the future. And when you look at what other places in the world would do, they'd analyze how efficient and modern is the system you have before you build something else. What we're saying, and the analysis is really clear, and now that the technical details are really starting to build even higher than what we assumed with all the work that Tom, Andy, and their teams are doing, we're going to be able to put a lot more trains through Roslyn to Stadium Armory with advanced train control, and even more so with platform screen doors and automation. And so we will not need to build another rail line through that area. Now, maybe in the future, people say there's other parts of our region that should be connected via rail, that there's no rail today. Fine, but then you would build a more modern system, which is, to Nick's point, overall cheaper to both operate and build. This will solve that problem. In conjunction, what we want to do is also a crosstown bus rapid transit line from Stadium Armory to Roslyn that will help us with that resiliency point of view. We are going to need to do maintenance forever on our system. So, for instance, 1 or twice a year, we shut down Foggy Bottom to Roslyn. Major disruption, but we have to do that track work. We need a real bus BRT system, and there's parts of in the district that need to be connected better, but we also believe Roslyn needs to be connected better as well. So you put those things together, we now do not believe we need a new tunnel. For quite frankly, a dime on the dollar, we're gonna get a better system, more capacity, and more reliability. And that's what the best practice of the world would be.
And then again, so then moving on, we talked a little bit about bus priority. This is going to be a partnership between WMATA and the local jurisdictions moving forward. But this is another area where, again, I want to give the WMATA team great credit because they have helped, I think, talk to the region about what bus priority can do, both in terms of customer service, but also from an expense side. So, today we often talk about how transit costs increase, sometimes at rates greater than inflation. Let's talk about how that can happen on a bus route. So let's, again, just bear with me here, but you have a bus route that runs every 10 minutes and the route takes 50 minutes. That means you need 5 buses to operate that service at that kind of frequency during the peak period. As we know, congestion happens. We've seen it increase, and there's definitely been routes where the road in which a Metro bus runs on, speeds have gotten 10% worse. Let's say that happens here, and the traffic congestion adds 10 minutes to the trip of this bus route. That means in addition to the increase in costs from labor or fuel or other kind of inflationary pressures, you now have to add an entire new bus, buy that bus, pay that driver, and pay for the gas just to maintain existing service levels. That has a significant impact on why a lot of times we see bus service costs going up and going up at a rate greater than inflation. And so if we move to the next slide, that's why as a part of DMV Moves, we have identified 6 priority, high ridership, existing high frequency bus routes where we are asking that WMATA and the local jurisdictions work together to make bus priority investments in those corridors. Those are going to be different in different places, but importantly, what those investments do is they will make trips faster. They will maintain those speed benefits because of the bus lanes, the boarding changes, the signal priority investments, and other capital upgrades that are made to the infrastructure. It will speed up those trips and allow those faster trips to be maintained over time because they're going to be reducing the exposure of those bus routes to the congestion on those roadways.
Mr. Donahue, if I could, Senator Eben, a question or a comment, and maybe Mr. Clark, some clarification here. A lot of talk about better bus network. Maybe just briefly describe what you were able to accomplish, you and your team were able to accomplish there, so people aren't confused maybe with what was said right there. Just.
Sure, yeah, thanks for the question, board member. So Better Bus was our larger umbrella of all things trying to improve the bus system across the region. And that's everything from how we operate, new facilities, bus priority treatments on the street, things of that nature. But the biggest component was what we call our network redesign. And we realigned where all the buses go, first time in 50 years. And we're already seeing, I saw a report last night, that on-time performance is the highest on bus in I think 4 years, and because of this network redesign. So our performance is gonna go higher. We believe we're gonna carry 13 to 15, give or take, 1,000 more people. And we actually did that not only cost neutral, we end up saving money. So most network redesigns cost more money. We actually did a cost neutral one because of the new software we're using. We were able to reduce what's called deadhead, so a bus that goes with no customers to where you start a route with customers, reduce that significantly. And this is, again, thinking about using technology, so that was a capital investment, how to drive the operation better. That is a little different than this. They do play together, which is these are 6 corridors that are arguably the most important bus corridors in our region. Doesn't mean there's not a bunch of other corridors that are very important. And after these 6, there's going to be 6 more, and then 6 more, and then 6 more. But these 6 are the ones that move the most amount of people, and we need to get better bus movement. Today, we're going to move on the bus system, even with the federal shutdown, we'll move 400,000 people on bus today, even with the federal shutdown. And the bus system is a very important part of our regional network. We want to move 500,000 people a day, and we think that's possible. But these corridors are ones we need to work with our local partners on because we don't control the roadway. So it could be a state agency, it could be a local jurisdiction, it could be another transit operator that we need to work collaboratively with and say, what are we going to run? What do you want to run? How do we build a service and fleet plan? And not you build a fleet plan and we build a fleet plan. What is the fleet plan for the next 20 years so we how to operate that? Do we need to run more 60-foot buses versus 40-foot buses that are not only more efficient, but we get more people on them? This is what we're really after to really up the game on bus. I will say we have a good bus system here in the region, no question, but we are behind all of our regional peers on investing in bus priority. If you went to a place like Boston, if you went to Seattle, San Francisco, way ahead of us. New York City is putting bus lanes almost everywhere. We are way behind, and they're doing it because it's the cheapest way to get way more people on transit. You got to take some roadway. It's very hard to do because a lot of people love parking. But if you take little spots here and there, and I think this shows 0.5% of the regional arterial network, we could actually move that many more people on bus. And what it actually does, it helps everyone else that drives. But it's change management, right? And we got to get people to see that a little bit of change can go a long way for everyone's benefit.
Clarification.
Yeah, and I guess as you look at this, the 2 corridors that you see in Virginia are Route 7 and Columbia Pike. For any of you who've been following kind of transit discussions in the region, I hope none of that is a surprise, right? We've been talking about the need to make improvements on those corridors. This will save millions of hours a year for those bus riders. We think it can attract tens of thousands of new riders. And as I talked about earlier, it will lower the operating cost of the service on that route. And then as decision makers, you have choices in front of you. You can use those savings and just kind of reduce the support, or you can increase service there or in other places to try and attract more people to transit without having an increased kind of operating bill for that transit service. And so this is going to be a big part of DMV Moves, but this is going to require coordination over time and over the coming years, as the general manager said, with those roadway owners. And so as a part of DMV Moves, the ask is that we partner with WMATA and find what is the right bus priority solution for those corridors and move forward and implement that which comes out of that process. All right, I have one more slide before the conclusion here. So another thing we've been working on in DMV Moves is, this region's pretty unique. We have 14 different transit operators that provide service in this region, and I think if we were starting from scratch today, we probably wouldn't set things up that way. There's a lot of reasons that way, and things are that way, and the local operators do a great job of providing service and that coordinates and works with the WMATA service. But there's a number of things that have been identified over the years and that folks raised through the DMV Moves process that we think we can do to make that customer experience a little bit more integrated and seamless. And so you see a few kind of examples up here. I'm not going to go through these in details, but just kind of one very basic concept is, can we move forward with a regional bus flag? so that whether you're traveling in your home jurisdiction or a different one, when you get to the bus stop and you try and look up and understand what service is there, it looks the same. We were talking with some folks from the Community Advisory Committee at the regional MPO TPB, and they said one of the hardest things for transit users in the region is that when they get out of their home jurisdiction, everything looks different. And that's kind of confusing, right? In transit, we don't want to make or increase the barriers and hurdles to using transit. We want to lower them and make it easier for people. And so all of these types of things here are about making it simpler to kind of use the regional transit system, recognizing that we have a variety of operators in this region, but we want to make it as easy as possible for people to use both the system they use on a regular basis and when they're going somewhere else in the region, maybe a system they don't use as frequently. So on to my final slide here. Again, in conclusion, we are recommending $460 million a year in new capital funding for WMATA that needs to grow 3% a year and be bondable. We are putting in place and recommending new accountability provisions to ensure as this region we have the ability to understand what this new capital funding is doing and ensure WMATA is delivering on the results it said we could expect for the new funding. We have a number of policies to try and improve the customer experience, and then we're asking that VDOT, MDOT, and DDOT, as long as the local partners, work with WMATA to help develop bus priority projects and implement those moving forward. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions you or other members may have.
Thank you. Are there further questions for Mr. Donahue or Mr. Smedberg? Okay. Thank you for a thorough presentation and for your work on this important initiative. Mr. Smedberg.
Thank you, Senator Evan. If I could, Nick, just go back to one of your main points, the 3%, the changes or the revisions that are possibly needed to make that better for all of us. Could you give an example of what may need to change, just to, while we have everything?
The 3% cost cap?
Yeah, the cost cap.
Yeah, and so today, guys, in Virginia law, there's a provision that if the subsidy request from WMATA goes up more than 3%, the CTB, Commonwealth Transportation Board, excuse me, is required to withhold 35% of the state funding that flows to WMATA. But the way that 3% cap works is it's just on the subsidy. So you could have less service and your bill could still go up 3%. The way it's structured today, and that is in compliance with the law. What we are asking WMATA to do, and they have said they will commit to do, is they will tell you and allow you to plan that if you want more service or less service, you will know exactly what that's going to cost, because the thing they produce, which is, again, a bus hour, a bus hour of service, a rail hour of service, if today it costs $1, tomorrow it will cost $1.03, and the year after that it will be $1.06. But you guys then get to make the decisions knowing what things will cost about how much service that you want in this region. And again, I think it also sends the right signals to the WMATA board and to management that as a region, we want you to make transit as affordable as possible so that we can make the decisions about how much we want to buy. Again, WMATA doesn't control everything that goes into the subsidy, but they do control how much their service costs, or have a greater degree of control, I should say. Before Randy corrects me, in the extent to which their service cost. And so let's ask management to focus on the thing it controls the most, and then you all, as the decision makers in this region, get to decide how much service you want to purchase from WMATA, and you'll know how much it costs.
Thank you, Mr. Donahue. I think that is a really important point that people have to understand. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. Before we move on, I just wanted to note for the record, Senator Surville has joined us online, and Delegate Delaney came in after roll call, but is here, and we appreciate that. Okay, next on the agenda, we have a presentation on cost containment research from Nathan Masick from HDR. So we have that. Thanks for joining us today.
All right. Thank you, Chair Evan. I'm going to do a brief introduction here for Nate, and let me get myself situated to make sure the audience can hear. I'm going to go to the next slide, please. For an update on cost containment research, you're about to hear from our consultant to NVTC, who's helping provide technical support to this effort. Before I turn it over to him, I would like to provide some context to the various threads of cost containment, cost efficiencies that are either operating as part of the study or in tandem with this subcommittee. So you just heard from WMATA, from Randy Clark, and from Tom Webster on their active, past and active efforts on cost containment, so I don't need to outline those again for you this morning. Nick outlined regional efforts underway at DMV Moves, which, as he mentioned, they're looking at accountability and other strategies for WMATA that could provide for a more seamless customer experience. Those could have some administrative cost savings. And something else that's currently underway right now is that Virginia has funded an operational analysis of WMATA that will identify opportunities for additional savings. This was a study that was funded in that 2 years of additional Commonwealth General Fund support to WMATA and is expected to have some results early next year. And then lastly, the piece you're about to hear about is that the SJ28 resolution requires an examination of cost containment tools, and so our consultant, Nate Masek from HDR, will provide a brief summary of some work his team did in looking at peer agencies to WMATA and their legislative cost containment and accountability tools, and how WMATA stacks up in comparison. This can inform legislative conversations around the aforementioned 3% subsidy cap, as well as other existing requirements in code. So off to you, Nate.
Okay, thank you very much. Nate, before you start, Delegate Sickles had a question.
On the Virginia study, who's doing that and who's paying for it? Is that part of part of Nate's? Okay. Well, who's responsible for that and who's doing that?
That is not part of Nate's work. I can turn it over to either Mr. Smedberg or Director Robinson, as it's a DRPT, and WMATA have engaged in that effort.
Thank you. That was a competitively procured by WMATA. It's Guidehouse is the consultant that's doing that operational analysis.
And
Paul, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and Senator Garvin, or Delegate Sickles, we've had weekly meetings. Actually, members of the Guidehouse team are here with us this morning. They've been doing a relatively deep dive into WMATA, doing surveys, interviewing folks, and we expect to have a report, in the next month and a half or so.
Thank you. Okay, let's get started then. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to talk about the cost containment legislation that we found in other places, and what we wanted to see was, what are other regions of the country doing similar to what we might consider for WMATA and for transit agency cost containment here in this region. So next slide. So we looked at the legislation elsewhere, looking at peer states. We'll show you which states those were in a moment, looking at what their legislative approaches were, and looking at how they seek to use these legislative controls to help manage cost growth. Next slide. So you can see here, here's the list of agencies that we reviewed. These include the major heavy rail agencies operating elsewhere in the country, as well as light rail operators with significant footprint, and then a few that are operating on a bi-state basis, recognizing that others are also in a multi-state environment similarly to WMATA. Next slide. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that there was no state legislation that specifically mandates transit agencies to contain cost growth. So I think that's important, that you don't legislatively say your cost shall not grow by a certain amount. What they do instead is use a series of common tools to help guide agencies to manage growth. So some of that is through oversight bodies, where you have management advisory boards or inspectors general, through greater transparency in how the agency is conducting its work, through financial reports and audits, accountability in the form of performance metrics that are reported to show how an agency is performing over time, enforcement, so if you fail to meet a certain expectation, there may be a funding consequence for non-compliance or poor performance. Fiscal discipline, where there's a budget process and an expectation that the budget needs to firewall funds in different ways. And then also on the operations front, in terms of can the operations be managed at a level that helps to sustain a cost-effective environment. Most of the time when these have been enacted through legislation, it's coincided with funding measures that have also been put in place at the same time. Next slide. So consequences. So there are different consequences for failure to meet the expectations here, and we see those through certain elements that agencies are expected to meet. I'll highlight a couple of these here. So performance targets are one, where you say that the agency needs to meet a specific amount of service level or effectiveness in order to receive state funding. Another expectation that might be out there is fare box recovery, that the percentage of your operating costs that are covered through fare box revenues meet a certain ratio. So you know, that might be struck out as a guide target measure for agencies to meet. And then compliance, that there be consequences for not complying with the requirements in different ways. Next slide. So as I emphasized, I just want to emphasize that there's no other state legislation that we reviewed that includes a specific and targeted cap on subsidy growth similar to WMATA's 3% subsidy cap increase. The other thing I'll note, the next slide, is that when it comes to WMATA, it does have a lot of the same reporting requirements that we see in this legislation in other states that's already in place. So you see a list of reporting requirements that already exist for WMATA. So it has the strategic plan, it has annual fiscal and operating audits, and independent audits, independent auditor. You have performance metrics and quarterly service reports, capital improvement program reports, and an asset inventory that WMATA is required to submit on a periodic basis. These are governed by a number of different requirements that are specified through policies that are enacted interjurisdictionally, as well as through some of the federal regulations in the code adopted by DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Next slide. And I would also note that elements of WMATA governance also fit with some of the expectations that we're seeing in other states' legislation. So you already have local, state, and federal representation on the WMATA Board of Directors. You already have an independent inspector general in the case of WMATA. Next slide. So the conclusion that we draw from the research here is that while there's many legislative actions that may be undertaken, that these actions alone may not help to lead to significant cost growth or containment, that just because you put these measures in, we didn't find a link here to say that this creates lower costs for these agencies per se. There's also been a number of these initiatives that have already been implemented for WMATA, which are helping to provide information and oversight into the operations of the agency. And it's already subject to many of the reporting and governance requirements that we're seeing in other states. And there may be limited opportunity for additional growth control measures beyond the 3% cap. You saw in Nick Donahue's presentation some concepts of that, but that's one of the takeaways here. A couple of additional observations are that as we talked about during the DMV Moves presentation, that the 3% cap is only a cap on subsidy and not on cost, so that's important to keep in mind. It doesn't necessarily require greater efficiency, it just means less funding. And the penalties enacted by, if the state were to not follow through on the funds in Virginia, the localities would be the ones who would have to make up the difference. And it would put a pressure on local budgets if the state were not to be able to make its payment. And then you also have 3 different jurisdictions here. And it's important to make sure that there are coordinated measures here among those jurisdictions so that you're not subject to competing requirements or conflicting requirements or even duplicative requirements across the 3 jurisdictions. And I think that's our last slide, so.
Thank you for the report, Mr. Masek. Are there questions about this cost containment research? Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Next, we have coming up, a presentation on transit agency needs. This presentation, we're going to talk about not just OmniRide and PRTC and VRE, but regional bus systems. And we've got 4 presenters. I want to ask people, if you could, hold your questions till the end. If you have a clarification that you need in real time, just let us know and we can ask the presenter to clarify, but otherwise we'll take the more meaty questions at the end. Thank you. Andrew, are you starting or? Okay, great.
I will get us started, and we're going to try to do these relatively rapid fire. Let's see. Now that you've heard from WMATA, the subcommittee will hear from myself and various agency staff to help paint a broader picture of transit agency needs in Northern Virginia that go beyond WMATA. When discussing potential revenue estimates back in June, we heard very clearly from the subcommittee that it was hard to understand how to evaluate sources without understanding the scale of the need, and we hope that this presentation provides that clarity. Next slide, please. Northern Virginia has an integrated transit network with services that extend from Loudoun County down to Spotsylvania County in 2 transportation districts, the Northern Virginia Transportation District, which is governed by NVTC, and the Potomac and Rappahannock Transportation District, which is PRTC. These services collectively move 2.1 million people each week and have seen a ridership increase of 15% year over year. NVTC is that geography for 5 local bus systems, VRE and WMATA, providing funding and governance to both of those agencies, and PRTC does that with OmniRide, which is, you'll hear from shortly, a local and commuter bus service provider, and they also have VRE. Both commissions are co-owners of VRE. Next slide, please. Before I dive into agency needs, I just want to remind the subcommittee about some of the trends on how we got here on identifying funding gaps for transit agencies. So this is a nationwide issue. This is not just a WMATA, not just a Northern Virginia or DC, Maryland, Virginia issue. Transit agencies across the nation are facing these gaps, and they're typically due to such factors as inflation, the cost of labor, construction, maintenance, etc. In the Virginia context, it isn't just inflation, but as you've heard from prior presenters, it's that many funding sources were fixed at certain numbers and do not adjust for inflation. So I think both Tom and Nick have covered kind of some of the issues with the WMATA Capital Fund. That's Virginia's share of that 2018 dedicated funding for WMATA. Something else to mention is that the regional gas tax, which is in the NVTC district and is used by our local jurisdictions to pay their WMATA subsidies, also was redirected in 2018 and is also not keeping up at all with inflation, as in fact declining. So it's our local governments that must find other resources to sort of offset that decline in that revenue source. And then lastly, state aid essentially is the box on the right. This is looking at DRPT merit operating funding. It is somewhat growing with inflation, as you can see, but as noted by DRPT in a parallel process, it is not keeping up with agency needs or the extent of agency costs. Next slide, please. So on the next slide, and keep on the slide for the moment, but what you're about to see is a roll-up of Virginia Transit Agency needs that will then come back at the end of this presentation. Before I go over those numbers, I'd like to use this slide to help set the stage about what you're about to see. The needs you're about to see are essentially representing the box on the left. They're mostly about maintaining current service levels, maintaining a capital state of good repair, preparing agencies for future growth, and that's primarily through setting up kind of stable funding structures so that all partners have predictability, reducing pressure on local general funds, and that's kind of a key phrase there. It does not eliminate local general funds at all in this equation. So there's our funding partners at the local level are still providing would still be providing a significant amount of resources. It would just simply reduce the pressure. And then lastly, as we've identified these needs, especially the operating need on the Virginia side for WMATA, the idea is that this funding need would remove WMATA from the Commonwealth's general fund, and I'll get to a little bit of background on that in a moment. There are some key discussion questions on the right. Those are just some things to think about as we go through the deck. We'll come back to those at the end, and then we can have time for discussion. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the those themes, which are state of good repair and maintaining service levels, generally applied against Northern Virginia transit agencies. And in working with all of our partners, it rolls up to an approximately $400 million per year. One thing I do want to mention is that DMV Moves went through an extensive process last year looking at different scenarios. Does the region want to solve for expansion, additional service? Where that process landed was what Nick Donahue covered, in that it is solving for the modernization needs and sort of state of good repair needs, and that the region also kind of, as I'll get into for a moment, handled the operating needs, at least on the DC and Maryland side. Approximately for that $400 million is a key word, because these agency numbers, if you kind of take out your calculator and do some math, they don't add up exactly. That is because, in part, because of that range on the WMATA capital side, means that some of these numbers aren't exactly settled yet, but I think this provides the appropriate scale for the subcommittee to have conversations. This is a cumulative annualized transit need that could be met by policymakers with some combination of state, regional, and local funds. So this does not mean there's a $400 million local ask. It doesn't mean that there's a $400 million state ask. It means there's a combined need of that amount, and how that gets solved is a decision essentially for the General Assembly. There are some important caveats on this slide. One is to note that most of this is in fiscal 28, so that's 2 years from now. However, WMATA operating funding is earlier, that's fiscal 27. The other important caveat is that, as was identified by both Tom and Nick, much of this funding would need to grow either at 3% or with inflation, so we're not talking about fixed numbers, we're talking about things that can grow over time. And VRE has identified a unique set of needs in their context, which Mark Schofield will speak to a little later, that there are some additional funding needs beyond keeping things going in fiscal 28 when Long Bridge opens. So a few caveats that are important for that. Each agency comprising these needs is unique, and they all have different types of funding. However, they have similar stories to tell, even within their unique political and geographic context. So you've already heard WMATA's story. I'll just very briefly recap it, and then you'll hear from my colleague Ann McGrain, who will address NVTC local bus needs, and then you'll hear directly from the CFOs of VRE and OmniRide to hear about their needs. The next slide. For WMATA, I'm going to cover two things very quickly. WMATA's unique operating needs in Virginia, and then recap Virginia's share of WMATA capital needs. So again, in the aggregate, this is about state of good repair, modernization, and keeping services going, reducing pressure on local general funds. I'm going to go over these in more detail in the next two slides. But the main thing to point out here is the starting fiscal year is different for each of those needs. So talking about operating, I have to do a little bit of backstory and history here. In fiscal 25, WMATA faced a very large operating budget gap. That was solved by WMATA in the region. Several things solved that: fare increases, service optimization, operating efficiencies, and that temporary suspension of the legislative 3% cap that allowed Virginia, Maryland, and DC to provide additional operating subsidies. That's that additional regional investment as shown there, to help maintain services. This regional agreement yielded dividends as WMATA and the region's transit ridership grew these last few years. In providing that additional investment, DC and Maryland found permanent operating solutions, and so they don't need to take any action here. In Virginia, the General Assembly provided that additional 2 years of funding from the Commonwealth's General Fund, and that was matched with funding from NVTC local jurisdictions. So as we move into fiscal 27, there is a need to find permanent long-term solution, as Mr. Alcorn mentioned earlier, for these temporary Virginia funding fixes. So since DC and Maryland have done their part here, this really is a Virginia conversation about how Virginia wants to meet its obligations to WMATA. And just a point of clarification, fiscal 27 is imminent. These budgets are being discussed and developed right now, both at WMATA and with our local jurisdictions. And so with no solution here, the entirety of that bill, so to speak, is would need to be met by our NVTC local jurisdictions. On the WMATA capital side, this has been extensively covered by prior presenters, so really the only thing I want to repeat here is that 460 million is that regional DC, Maryland, Virginia investment. There's a Virginia share that is currently a range, and that is in part due to formula variables being updated. And as Nick Donahue spoke to extensively, this is will most likely need to be found from regional funds in Virginia due to that need for bondable funding by WMATA. So Nick spoke to that extensively. I just kind of want to remind the subcommittee of that point on this slide. Next slide, please. And at this point, I get to turn it over to my colleague, Ann McGrain.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. I'm Ann McGrain, Deputy Director of Programs and Policy at MVTC. And I'll be talking about local bus needs. And when we're talking about local bus in this context, we're discussing the 5 agencies that operate in the MVTC district. So that's Arlington Transit, City of Fairfax Q, Fairfax Connector, Alexandria Dash, and Loudoun County Transit. And these bus agencies really form an integrated system with Metro, and like Metro, they've seen dramatic ridership increases, and in many cases are carrying more people than they did before the pandemic. But also in the same way that we've heard through many themes this morning, our local agencies are struggling with those same issues that confronted transit agencies across the United States with the pandemic and ensuing inflation, which led to operating costs increasing faster than revenue sources. So as a result, we're estimating a need of about $35 million for the MVTC local bus agencies, and splitting that amount across these 5 agencies would help maintain service levels, support state of good repair, and reduce some pressure, but definitely not all, on the local general funds. Next slide, please. This slide is really to show how local agencies rely on a variety of funding sources at the state, regional, and local levels. And so as state and regional sources struggle to provide that same proportion of an operating budget that they once did, localities are faced with tough choices of either reducing service, potentially delaying purchases, or filling that gap with general fund revenue. And as I'm sure all of us around this room are aware, for localities, that really means that you're relying on a property tax as one of your few or main existing tools at your disposal for that. And then when we consider changes in funding levels for Metro and VRE, they can also have an impact on what's available for those local systems. It's for that reason that we have the fiscal 27 calendar icon at the bottom of this slide as a reminder, because if that $153 million WMATA operating solution is not identified, it puts immense pressure on local funds that might otherwise be used to fund local buses. And lastly, as Andrew mentioned earlier, the state aid in the form of merit operating funding, it hasn't been rising at the same rate as the costs. So it's becoming harder for the merit funds to kind of support the typical proportion of an operating budget that they once did. So the takeaway really for the MVTC local bus needs is that there are risks to most of the MVTC's jurisdiction's usual transit funding sources. And when you combine that with rising costs, it hopefully demonstrates why our local bus systems would benefit from having this new source of local transit funding.
All right, thank you, Ann. Good morning to the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think the story for VRE is clear. VRE was created in the early 1990s as an experiment to serve the commuters of Northern Virginia and give them an alternative to the crowded interstates. That experiment was a success, and VRE had more than a decade of consistent ridership growth in the 2000s and into the 2010s. At that point, however, our business model began to stagnate, really, for 2 reasons. One was capacity. We have one entry point into Washington, D.C., that is the Long Bridge. That bridge is at capacity. And also, as a tenant running on host railroads, we are limited in terms of the number of slots that we can run, and therefore the changes that we can make to what we offer to the customers. The other then is a changing environment. Even then, we could see sort of the coming plateau in the commuter market, and we wanted to start looking ahead and offering things to riders outside of that peak hour, peak direction service. But we were stymied, I would say, at that time about how to offer that. Everything then changed in 2019 and 2020. In 2019, the Commonwealth announced Transforming Rail in Virginia, a multi-billion-dollar investment in both commuter rail and intercity rail, with really sort of dual capstones, one being a new long bridge across the Potomac, and the other being state ownership of the rail right-of-way, which will in turn give us the ability to offer significantly more level of service. Speaking as a person in the rail industry, I don't think it can be overstated what a commitment this is by Virginia. The rail people in the other states are very jealous of what we're doing here in the Commonwealth with that. And then, of course, in 2020 was the pandemic. And all those slow changes that we were observing in the market all got pulled ahead to now. And it became very clear that VRE needed to become something new, not a commuter railroad, but a regional railroad. And I think this new vision has been very clearly reflected in the new system plan that was just adopted for VRE by our two commissions. So, as Andrew mentioned, the VRE has two needs. One of them is immediate, and one of them is a little bit into the future. The immediate need is the structural gap in our budget caused by the changes in the commuting market and the lower levels of ridership. We estimate that need, as shown here, to be about $35 million a year, just to ensure that we can continue to operate our service and maintain VRE in a state of good repair. Then once Long Bridge opens, then we will need additional revenue in order to operate all those midday, reverse, and weekend trains that we want to put out there to take advantage of the Commonwealth's major investment in rail and ultimately to become that truly regional railroad. Next slide, please. So VRE receives revenues from a lot of different sources. Just to hit highlights on a couple of them. Right now, pandemic relief money is what is keeping our operating budget balanced. That will be exhausted relatively soon. We also get those kind of normal FTA grants that we use to keep our equipment and our facilities in a state of good repair, and then also to participate in TRV. We have generally taken on the station and yard expansion portions of TRV, while VPRA has handled the track and the bridges and all those major projects in the rail right-of-way, and we use that FTA money in order to participate in TRV. We do receive dedicated money annually out of the MTF, but those must be used in part to match those FTA grants. That money is relatively slow growing, and it won't increase when the time comes to add those trains. Our local jurisdictions have been tremendous partners to VRE over the years, but they, as we've talked about, have their own constraints and are having to make their own tough choices, even to support VRE now, let alone trying to have the capacity to support those new trains that we want to put in place. And then last, we have the CROC, which we've talked about before. We have used those dedicated monies to participate in some major capital projects, both with VPRA and with Amtrak, especially where we need to bring non-FTA money to the table. We also have leveraged that money back in 2002 to make a major contribution to VPRA's purchase of the right-of-way from CSX. Our regional gas tax monies that go into the CROC are completely committed through 2032. And as we've talked about in other contexts here, they don't grow with inflation. But I'll add my last plug here before handing it over to OmniRide. Distinct from the gas taxes that go into it, the legal structure of the CROC works very well for VRE. We've talked about it in the Metro context about the ability to use it for operating your capital, the ability to be bondable. CROC has those characteristics, and so whatever comes out of this process in terms of the region, at least for VRE, we would like for CROC to continue to be a part of that answer. So, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Phil Perella. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for OmniRide, also sometimes used as the Potomac Rappahannock Transportation Commission. Briefly talking about our funding needs here, beginning in fiscal 28, we're looking at roughly $22 million structural deficit. what really got us to this point was pandemic funding. We have exhausted all of that. We'll talk about that in the next slide. But this is now an ongoing operational and capital need that helps us maintain our current support level or current service levels, state of good repair for our facilities and fleet, as well as preparing us for future growth. And doing something that we do quite well, which is leveraging the investments in I-66 and I-95 toll lanes. Very briefly, it has been touched here, but we do provide commuter services, generally from Prince William County down to Spotsylvania. We are now in Warren County, Fauquier County, bringing commuters into DC and Northern Virginia for work. In addition to that, we also provide local bus services in Prince William County, and that includes things like dedicated paratransit services as well as microtransit services, that more on-demand based service. But yes, this is an ongoing capital operating need. Next slide, please. And so our funding structure, as I mentioned, the COVID funding has been exhausted. We use that to basically bridge the structural gap during that period, but now we do no longer have that. So what we do is use the regional gas tax, but we work with our local jurisdictions, in particular Prince William County, to help balance our budget at this point. It is a year-by-year proposition. There are not taxes or revenue streams that are dedicated to us, so each year we present our budget to them, and then they make the call on whether or not they will be funding us, and that is sort of the structural nature of that. We also have, revenues that we receive that allow us to operate what I call route-by-route funding, these toll revenues. We are allowed to apply through competitive programs with NVTC as well as DRPT to basically fund individual routes. And those are not guaranteed, those are not dedicated, and they are competitive. So if those go away, we would have an issue being able to subsidize those routes moving forward. And the primary story really at OmniRide is, for some time now, probably back to 17, 18, is the motor fuels tax, the regional gas tax. That is the source that our local jurisdictions have used to provide their local share, both operating as well as capital match. And that is simply, as we all know, a flat or very, very, very minimal growth fund source at this point. It is not keeping up with operational inflation at an operating agency such as ours. But on the good side, our ridership has increased significantly. These services that we are providing on those two major corridors, I-66 and I-95, has brought some increases to our passenger revenue, bringing us back to past levels, which is an encouraging thing. But we still, have the structural deficit that was discussed before. And so that does limit our opportunities to have predictability, to put sort of a long-term coherent system plan together, because simply many of our fund sources are year by year, sort of pay as you go, if you will. And that concludes my remarks.
I wanted to ask Mr. Perella, just as a clarification, what does it cost to ride OmniRide?
It is $11 for each one-way trip. And there is no local fare. That is just for the commuter fare. So if you're essentially coming into Northern Virginia or the district, it would be $11 each way.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And a question from Delegate Sickles.
Thank you. On the point that I think I've heard some debate on this in the past, but the formula, the bus distribution formula in the state doesn't recognize the benefits of commuter bus. Apparently, if we changed it to benefit commuter bus, other jurisdictions would be harmed by that at our constant level of funding. Is that true? Could you talk about the politics of that a little bit?
No, that's a very good point. We are I would say, a relatively unique agency. There's about a 1,500 square mile area that we are actually covering, bringing commuters into the Northern Virginia district area. So we don't fit nice and neatly into a formula. So the point that you made would be accurate. What we're, I think, looking for and working towards is a formula that includes those benefits that we provide without harming others as well, because what you pointed out is very accurate and could certainly do damage to them moving forward.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Yes.
Well, could you share some ideas with us, some various ways that it could be rectified?
We're working through some of those, but, getting a little wonky on the formula. The way that you factor in our operating costs is certainly one element of that. The way you factor in our revenue miles traveled is a way that factors into that. And so there's a variety of elements in that formula, and some of those would be ways that could certainly mitigate.
Look forward to seeing those.
Thank you. Andrew, were you going to wrap up the, I'm sorry, another question?
Sure.
Yes, Director Robinson.
I just wanted to chime in because at DRPT, we actually have an open public comment right now that you can find on our website that does actually offer some policy considerations that we're looking at to recognize some of the things that have been discussed. We do already recognize commuter service deadhead miles at one point in the formula. So there is that, but we do believe that maybe there could be more. It is a zero-sum game with the funding that we're given, so any changes we make, benefit some and disadvantage others. So we're looking at that very closely, and the public comment period closes November 21st. So there's still a lot of time for anyone to take a look and send feedback to our department.
Thank you. Delegate McClure?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just thank you for that presentation. Just a quick clarification question. So under local general funds on slide 65, just curious what the average amount of gap funding that you receive through those annual requests to PWC.
Sure. They are not out of the general fund. Right now they're using they fund us through the grantor's tax and the transient occupancy tax, and the total right now is about $10 to $12 million depending on the budget cycle.
Yes, Mr. Alcorn.
Thank you. Just very quickly, back to Andrew earlier in this presentation, you just mentioned that one of the things that's being looked at going forward is metro funding being bondable on the capital side. So as you look at that, I would just encourage you to think about how that accommodates, at least historically, many local governments' support for WMATA capital coming out of the 2018 agreement, which is frankly through general obligation bonds. So no, that's how we've been doing it. That may not be how we do it going into the future, but just looking at that is, I think, going to be important. Thank you.
Yes, were you going to wrap up? Okay, Andrew, please.
Yes, thank you. I will be concise in my wrap up here to allow further questions and discussion. So this does bring us back to that same roll-up slide. So this is unchanged from earlier. What I want to kind of end with on this slide is to just note that this is about Northern Virginia Transit Agency needs. But as we have had these conversations with our colleagues in the Commonwealth, especially through the Virginia Transit Association, we're hearing that there are other transit agency needs in Hampton Roads, Richmond, Charlottesville, other parts of the Commonwealth. So there certainly is the potential to continue those conversations, and there are potentials where statewide revenues can support statewide needs that helps all agencies in the Commonwealth, including these Northern Virginia transit agencies. Next slide, please. So again, another concise roll-up here. We just wanted to put it in a very simple timeline to convey those kind of two different timepieces here. Most of this is that fiscal 28 need, but there is that earlier fiscal 27 need for that WMATA operating funding, noting that those budgets are under discussion now. And as Mark Schofield from VRE mentioned, there is a need for VRE for additional operating funding when Long Bridge opens. Next slide, please. So this prior needs information was about state of good repair and maintaining service. There certainly are additional funding opportunities as shown on this slide, mostly in the sense of expansion. And there are some policy choices for the subcommittee and others as well in the General Assembly about policy considerations to solve beyond what staff have identified here in terms of replacement or further reducing local general fund expenditures. That's above and beyond that $400 million. And other potential policy considerations that can kind of relieve funding pressure on our local governments. Next slide, please. So at this point, I take us back to those two key discussion questions that we brought back earlier. The first is, essentially, are these the right needs? Are staff on the right track? Is this what the subcommittee wants to solve for? And then second, is there a potential to solve beyond that? So I will go ahead and pause right there and hand it to the chair for facilitating discussion.
Thank you. So our first question was, do we support the needs as outlined today? And I guess in a transit funding solution, and for reference, if you go back to slide 66, is that what we want to address? Are there any comments or concerns with those numbers or discussion on that? Was there any, are we comfortable? There's been a lot of work that's come into determining these numbers, but want to make sure that we're all in the same direction. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Personally, I think we're all on the same page, but just for context, I'd be really curious. Something Andrew said was there are some other statewide needs that came up, so I'd be curious to know what those needs are and what the dollar amount associated with those needs are, just to have for context for this committee.
Are you referring to slide
66.
or 66?
Yes.
Yeah, and then the other needs.
Yes.
And to be specific, you're referring to like other agencies in the Commonwealth who may have additional needs?
Yes, when you brought up there are some needs in Hampton Roads and other areas, it would be great to have that context for background.
Absolutely. I think there's in fact like a Hampton Roads Transit is having some kind of summit literally today. And so, I don't want to put any numbers out there that our other agencies haven't vetted, but I think we'll continue to have those conversations through VTA and others and see what we can bring to the table relatively quickly here.
Yes, Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Appreciate all the presentations today. Just also would just like to confirm that all of this would be new money. So I happen to be a member of NVTA. There's concern that none of the funding is siphoned away from the efforts that NVTA is ongoing. And I would agree that we do need, because if we're going to pass something through the General Assembly, we're going to need more than just Northern Virginia's support. And so making certain that we're looking at the entire Commonwealth, I think, is a very thoughtful and pragmatic approach.
And just as an update for members of the committee, Kate briefed the House Appropriations Committee, I believe it was on Monday, and has previously briefed both staff and leadership of Senate Finance earlier about our efforts.
Yes, I have. Indeed, I have, Mr. Chair. And so, yeah, I think, and thank you for the invitation, Delegate Sickles, to the meeting yesterday. I think overall it was very well received. And as well as earlier this summer, we had some opportunity to meet with staff of Senate Finance. And again, understanding that context. Just to go back to your question, Delegate McClure, and I know that that Ms. Robinson and DRPT have actually been doing some examination of the growth and expected costs of the transit statewide and how the state merit funding is not meeting that. So there are actually some really good documented. When it comes to the individual needs of those transit systems, indeed, we've been working through the Virginia Transit Association very closely. And so they are all in some ways envious of the work of the last 2 years here, but they're also putting together a similar level of effort to identify what their needs are. But what I have heard unanimously is everybody's facing the same disconnect between the rate of growth of revenues coming in and the rate of costs of running a system that's going to work for their communities.
Perhaps an unfair question for Mr. DeVetter. If we were going to put money into statewide sources that would benefit other areas in addition to the $400 million that we need to come up with in total, what kind of scale would that add, or how much money might to make a meaningful difference for these other transit agencies?
Absolutely. So I don't have the numbers directly in front of me, but I think an implicit assumption from staff as we've been working towards these is, Delegate Sickles mentioned, 50-50. If the regional funds, if WMATA's dedicated capital needs are solved regionally, are there opportunities to find that operating solve from statewide revenues or in part. I think understanding how the Commonwealth Transportation Fund and then Commonwealth Mass Transit funds flow money to everyone. There are opportunities that if there's statewide revenues that flow to all agencies in the Commonwealth and they're part of this Northern Virginia solve, kind of by default, they're also part of multiple agency solves through the way the DRPT in code allocates that revenue. I think part of that allocation is to VRE, WMATA, and then there's some other smaller things, and then local transit capital and operating. So I think very much it's the way staff are thinking here is that structurally there's a way a rising tide can lift all boats.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Smedberg.
Thank you. Andrew, there's been a lot of vetting and analysis of Metro's needs. Could you give us a little insight in how rigorous the analysis has been toward the numbers on, VRE and OmniRide and maybe others?
I can speak to a little bit of the analysis on the local needs, and I'll kind of defer to my colleagues to my left for VRE and OmniRide. On the local needs side, what we did is we worked very closely with our colleagues at COG on data that was submitted to DMV Moves. So we actually were able to use some of that effort in that process over the last 2 years, where they kind of asked each agency to input a variety of assumptions. And at the end of the day, each agency does operate differently, and they kind of all take a little bit of a different set of assumptions. So it is very much an it's kind of a apples to oranges type situation. But what we did is basically took that initial work, looked qualitatively at kind of the assumptions and then like some of the disconnects that we saw in state aid and the way things were growing, and as I think has been previously mentioned, not keeping up with agency needs. And then that analysis is essentially what fed into that kind of rolled up $35 million for local agencies, recognizing that does represent 5 local bus systems across 5 cities and counties.
So you're comfortable with the rigor that went into that?
Yeah, I mean, I am comfortable with it. I do want to caveat there is sort of an approximate nature to some of that. So I think it's really for our local bus systems, it's about the scale and making sure that their disconnect is their structural disconnect. It's the same trends as WMATA. It's just a slightly, you kind of move the decimal place over, so to speak, from WMATA. So I think for us, we're comfortable with that scale, and I'll kind of let.
And another question, your first slide, you mentioned the 15% year-over-year ridership growth. What percentage or what proportion of that percentage is from the local systems?
I don't have that directly in front of me. We can certainly get back to you.
If we can go back to slide number 69, that's where we have our key discussion questions. I'm going to ask Supervisor Alcorn. He wanted to pose a question.
Yeah, thank you. And my answer to the first one is definitely yes. I do support meeting the needs. The second one, in terms of needs beyond those identified in the discussion, I do want to make sure, and I realize we don't have answers for this right now, but I want to make sure that we're also looking at where we are growing in Northern Virginia, where we have a lot of transit-oriented development, but beyond Metro, there are going to be transit needs. There are transit needs emerging. Thinking specifically the Reston, Herndon, Chantilly, Centerville area, maybe Ashburn. We see a lot of new development, new growth going on there, and I'd love to see. Maybe it's more of a planning focus over the next few years, but those will also require resources. So I'd love to see us at least be ready to address that. Thank you.
Mr. DeVetter, did we include, was there the Loudoun Transit, is that one of the bus lines? And the numbers they submitted to us, they were told, obviously, that's for the future growth. Do we know if that's considered?
Yeah, Loudoun County is one of the 5 agencies in that NVTC local bus roll-up.
I was just thinking of the Silver Line and also in Fairfax, but those numbers we're pretty comfortable where they are. We don't need to recheck before then. Okay, thank you. And then the second question posed up here is about, is that Senator Serval? Yeah, please, go ahead, you have the floor. Yes, we can hear you fine. Thank you. Senator Serval, the bike and pedestrian improvements that were sought or desired or needed, did you say $19 billion?
I believe between $9 and $19 billion study, I believe, over a decade.
Yeah, okay, because we're talking here about $400 million a year. That's a significant addition. Are there any comments on adding, as Senator, I guess you're advocating Senator Serval to broaden what we're trying to raise?
The NDTA is going to provide piece, and I just want to make sure everybody was aware of that, because whatever we propose is going to be evaluated in the context of that NDTA bike and ped proposal as well. I think we need to be aware of it.
Okay.
With regard to question number 2, I was talking about
Okay, maybe we can get some context from Ms. Mattice or Director Robinson. When the Silver Line expanded, or when other stations like Potomac Yard or other expansions to Metro came into being, did those get funded through kind of one-offs, or how would that relate to what we're doing here?
I may be penalized by only having 11 years in this space and not further back, but I do know that on some of those major expansions, particularly the first part of the Silver Line out to Tyson's, that did rely greatly on a federal discretionary grant program, while the extension all the way out to Dulles was a loan, and there was no federal involvement in that. But I don't have the homework on that, but I know it was definitely a big lift to get those funded.
Okay, yeah, and that also is funded through the Dulles Toll Road, I believe. Scott, do you know what the cost is for the yellow line extension that you were referring to Hybla Valley?
I know the numbers that we were throwing around, actually, I know the conversation 10 years ago was about $1 billion per mile. I think it's about 2.5 miles. I think it's talked 2.5 billion, and whatever those numbers were back then, but I haven't seen anybody cost it out since then.
Yeah, so 2.5 billion would add pretty significantly to our $400 million a year problem. Are there any other questions or comments about expanding the effort that we are trying to solve for? Okay. Well, thank you for raising it. Anything else you want to say about that, Senator Sturvell? Okay. Okay.
Sorry, is that a question to me?
Yeah, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to suggest. I mean, you're identifying some pretty large numbers. We were looking at $400 million a year. Are you proposing that we take a particular course of action today or at our next meeting? Or just to be aware and be willing to work with those? Right.
The question phrased is, we want to look at expansion and other policy considerations. I think over the long term, we need to identify some ways to expand transit, or else nothing's ever going to expand. And anyway, I can talk further offline about
Okay, well,
conversations around DC about it.
thank you for raising the points, and we'll be mindful of that. Okay. Now, before we get to looking ahead towards our final meeting, I want to see if there's any public comment. I don't know, do we have a mic in here for the public? Okay. Was there any members of the public who were here today to address the subcommittee? Okay. Then we're going to be drafting some recommendations for consideration at our November 5th final meeting. And it will reflect the state-local partnership in funding transit, cost containment tools and strategies, revenue sources and structures to meet the needs, and key constraints such as bondability. I will be reaching out to members of the subcommittee before our next meeting in just a few weeks for any additional input. My thought is that our final product will be a set of recommendations in the form, perhaps in the form of a resolution, identifying the need and our principles on how they're met, and prioritizing, if we can agree at our next meeting, on the best way to meet those needs. So if members have thoughts, feel free to contact me. And that meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, November 5th at 2 p.m. It was kind of hard to find a date. It's going to be at MVTC again on the second floor. Members, it would be great if you can make sure that's on your calendars. And is there any further discussion from members of the subcommittee for today?
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Sickles.
Do we need to have a motion on question number 1, so we settle the overall target for what we're going to try to do? If so, I would make the motion that we approve the investments that are listed on page 66, if you want them.
Okay, there's a motion from Delegate Sickles, a second from Delegate McClure, that we adopt slide 66 as the principle that we're trying to solve for at our final meeting. All in favor of that, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so we're unanimous on that. Thank you for that. We will be in touch and look forward to seeing you all on November 5th at 2 p.m. Thank you. And I want to especially thank Nikhil, Stephen, and Andrew for coming up from Richmond. You could get a sense of our pain on a regular basis, except you did it during rush hour, so that was appreciated. Thank you. Also, Director Robinson.